Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide, is that worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Yes, I love you. You don't need to smack me with your ears. Alright? I'm wearing these today because I can't find my other glasses, and I don't know. I feel weird not doing these reviews without glasses nowadays, so yeah. Just prepared for cool Afrodo to be taking you down these reviews. Anyways, today's book is The Dead Take the A Train, which I have been mistakenly calling The Dead Don't Take a Train in my TBR and a couple other places. But anyways, this is a book written by Cassandra Khaw and Richard Khadrey. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And published on October 3rd, 2023. On Goodreads, it claims to be the first of a Carrion City series of books, though it is currently the only one released as of this moment. I'm unsure if this is a series or it was planned to be a series. Now, considering how the book ends, that's a spoiler, can't say that, with only a few of the plot things resolved and a clear, obvious hook at the end, I'm going to guess that a second book was at least planned at a certain point. But there have been a couple books on the channel where it was the only book despite it being planned to be part of a series, and it didn't end up being part of a series. Like Host is, I think, the most egregious one, because the author outright outlined several of the sequel and its titles. Now, it was only published in 2023, and it's only 2025 as of this review. So obviously, there's probably still time. There's no point in saying, it's a doomed cause. I just couldn't find anything on it when I looked it up. But anyways, both Richard Khadrey and Cassandra Khaw boast a series of books in their lexicons. A series of horror books to back them up. Though, if I had to guess from looking at their various bibliographies, The Dead Take the A Train feels a little more like a Cassandra Khaw book that Richard Khadrey helped on than a Richard Khadrey book, or a cooperation of the two. Other than that, I couldn't find too much on the background of this book, so here's the report card. And now we move on to the cover. Now, as I mentioned in my TBR video of this month, the whole reason I chose to review this book at all was because, I mean, just look at this wonderful cover. It's got all the right elements here, and personally, hopefully the screens aren't clashing with each other here. Now, personally, I'm something of a sucker when it comes to surreal art with a hint of horror behind it. It's just a shame that so few of these shirts that have these art pieces are actually ever in my size. It's downside of being a bigger guy. And this cover works, but anyways, this cover works really well, not only showing a good representation of the cosmic threat we're dealing with here, but also showing the Statue of Liberty framing the threat, alerting us that right away this book is definitely taking place in the US and is most likely going to be in New York City. I only don't say definitely New York City because the Statue of Liberty has become something of synonymous with the US in general, not just New York. Though I will have to talk a little bit about the setting of New York here. But anyways, I have great cover. I don't really have any notes at all with this. It's great. I love it. Although, based on how the book is written, I would have expected a lot more eyeballs on the cover. But to move on, you might be asking yourself, well, what is this book about? It's a great question. For those of you curious to see how the book presents itself, please check out my Pride TBR release at the start of this month. I think reading the back of the book is a great way to judge how the book presents itself and what foundations it really thinks you need to build before going into the work, what expectations you should have going in. But for the context of this review, the story is... Okay, so the story is... There is a story. But I think what it tries to be about is Julie's taking in her best friend and unresolved crush Sarah after Sarah flees her abusive husband Daniel. At least it's kind of the story presented on the back and the story of the book for the first 150 pages. After that, it sort of pivots into a different story about a cosmic threat called the Mother Who Eats coming to this world, where her arrival will be heralded by her children, like worm things that will eat the minds and replace the humans of this world. Sort of almost exactly like the intellect devourers from D&D. And trying to stop that, kinda, while also dealing with the biggest douchebag in the world, a man named Tyler, who is also Julie's ex, and is the most incompetent person in the world who constantly fails up somehow. And, yeah, that's kind of what the book is about. It's hard to give too much in terms of context for this review, because I'm also sort of spoiling the book, because a lot of this stuff doesn't happen until near the halfway point of the book. So you're more than halfway through the book before all this stuff about the Mother Who Eats and stuff starts appearing. Well, a little bit before the halfway point, but the point is you are a substantial part of the way through the book before you really get what this book is actually about. Even the whole protecting Sarah from her abusive ex is... Let's just get into the review so I can actually rant a little bit about this book. When I decided to review a book that I was going to be an LGBT cosmic horror story, the last thing I really expected from this book is to be bored. Even if I didn't like the book, I genuinely expected it to keep my attention all the way through. Like, I did not like Mighty Quill, although I wouldn't really call that a cosmic horror, but anyways. I didn't like Mighty Quill, but it kept my attention. Maybe in a bad way that was entertaining, or I did expect this book maybe to be so crazy that it's like watching a bad car wreck. It hurts my soul to keep looking at it, but something about it is keeping me from looking away, and no. It's probably one of the most middling books I've ever read. Largely because it's just not that interesting, all things considered. It's to me, it's so purely in the middle of the road that it's almost worse than a bad book. And this is sad to say because the book starts out really good. We start mid-job for Julie as she's trying to tear a demon out of a bride during a bachelor party. But then we get a twist where the demon inhabiting the body of the woman she's trying to save is actually not the worst monster in the room, as the mother-in-law reveals that she's basically using her daughter as a vessel for more demons because it's family tradition. The demon inside of her is just an uninvited guest. We get a good taste of what the book is going to be like with this cosmic horror and a more cynical world, twists like that where things are gory, and this book I think classifies pretty closely to a splatterpunk, but I'll get more into that later. And I'll be honest, even though they were kind of middling and Julie's and Sarah's chemistry is almost comical on how much they should already be together, I did kind of find it rather endearing when they were enjoying each other's company and reconnecting. I love that mushy shit. Don't get me wrong, it does get a little frustrating somewhere in the middle, where basically everyone who even halfway knows either character are basically just saying, oh my god, will you two kiss already? But the two of them keep doing the, oh no, we couldn't do that, we're just friends. Obviously she just thinks of me as a friend. And it's like, so comically clear that the two of them like each other, but I don't hate it that much. It's kind of one of those, it's a trope I don't like, but it's a trope I forgive a lot. But the book itself just doesn't deliver on what I was expecting of it. Now, I saw this as not the biggest fan of Splatterpunk-X works. As I've mentioned before in reviews past, I'm not the biggest fan of Gorefest. Not necessarily that I'm squeamish, really, and it's largely just because the horror of blood, guts, and bodily waste rarely tends to affect me, and at a certain point just feels gratuitous. There's only so often that you can rip someone's guts out, or tear muscle and gristle out of their body, be brutally tortured before you just sort of, it's just noise on a paper. That's why I never really cared for the Saw movies after the third one. At a certain point to me, they were just gory simply for the sake of being gory. What else is there about the movie to care about? And don't get me wrong, there are things like House of a Thousand Corpses where I just feel, and that's largely the vibe I get from this book. At times it feels like it's being gory, it's being gross, it's being visceral, just for the sake of being those things. Not because it really works to set its tone or helps the narrative anyway. It just is. And sure, that may come from a scene where Julie implies that she chews through her own tongue to the point that she feels her veins, sending me all sorts of heebie-jeebies just trying to imagine that shit. But I think the finest point I can mention is the barbed wire magic we see Julia use in the beginning, or Julie use in the beginning. You see, at one point, Julie introduces barbed wire magic, which has the interesting concept that it demands as much from you as you use on other people. So let me read this scene here for you. Julie rolled up her sleeves and counted her way up the thorns embedded in her forearms until she hit 7, then reached in and yanked. Barbed wire magic, in one form or another, had always been around for centuries, a sacrosanct practice in the original form until kings and cartels realized pain didn't have to be holy, it merely needed to be obliterating. She tore the barbed wire from her arm, blood and tattered muscle and strands of warm fat spraying the wall. Pain shot through her whole body, almost slippery, and she gasped as her vision blurred to white along the rim. The world swam. She was drowning in the pain. But this was the price. She understood this is what she had to pay, and that in this world, nothing came free, especially not miracles. Now, when I read that scene, do you envision the barbed wire literally tearing its way out of her arm, ripping her arm to pieces in a horrendous way that effectively will leave it useless for the sake of this power? Something that'll be caught up in like a sling or heavily bandaged for the rest of the book. Yeah, I did too. So imagine my surprise when after this scene ends, Julie's arm feels completely fine for the rest of the book, and she didn't even, we don't see her mentioning how it's still sore or how she had to bandage it. It's just fine after the scene. It's literally a scene of her destroying her arm in a gory way for no long-lasting consequences. And this is what I mean when I say the book reads as if it's gory for the sake of it. We're told this magic takes a toll, and the toll is very physical, very visceral in nature. That pain is literally the reason this magic works. Except Julie doesn't have to deal with that toll or pain after the magic is over. For all intents and purposes, it could have worked the exact same way as Dresden powers in the Dresden Files, with the exception that we actually see Dresden's form of spellcasting take a toll on him, as it gets harder and harder for him to concentrate on spells, to move the energy out, and you actually feel like he's suffering consequences the more he uses his magic. And every chapter of this book includes some visceral description of gore, like this isn't even really needed at a certain point in the chapter. One chapter has Julie's abusive ex reminisce about a time he saw a little girl get hit by a semi. And he describes in real visceral detail what happened to that little girl when she got hit by the semi. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, but why? Why do we need... Like, okay, I get why this is revealed as part of its backstory. I think it's a little... I'll get into why I think that's a little much in the future. But I get why it's there narratively. But why are we describing the scene? Why are we talking about the girl's head exploding as the truck hit her? There's no reason for it. It's just there to be gory. Another non-spoiler critique. Actually, for the most part, this entire review is going to be non-spoiler critiques because I can kind of just tell you everything wrong with this book without having to really delve into the plot. If I really had to put, there's nothing wrong with the narrative itself. There's a couple things I can talk about here and there about the story, but for the most part, most of my critiques about this book come more from the way it's written and the way it's executed, rather than the story itself. There's one thing I'm going to talk about later, but to get back into it, another non-spoiler critique that I can provide of this book is that this book is, well, You could say that the tome luxuriates in the gratuitous deployment of esoteric verbiage, draping itself in a veneer of pseudo-erudition to masquerade as something far more intellectually formidable than its paltry substance could ever genuinely sustain.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it? Yeah.
Or rather, in simpler terms, that it rather likes to use rare or esoteric words simply for the sake of using them. Now, I'm a big reader, so it does feel a little strange to complain about this sort of thing. Generally speaking, I love seeing lesser used words propped up in books. Not only does it expand my own vocabulary, but oftentimes it's used in a way that, with the context clues around it, it doesn't even break my immersion. I can figure out what that word means without stopping to look at a dictionary. But this book feels like it's only using those words so I can sit back in his chair, sip his little wine, and look down at his nose on you and be like, peasant.
What is this, you gonna talk down to everyone just because you won a game of Trivial Pursuit?
Perhaps.
It's not terrible, but it does get a bit frustrating at times. The writing is very self-indulgent. It almost feels like the authors is rubbing themselves. How do I critique this without making it sound overtly sexual? It feels like the author thinks the work is more superior because they're using these. I kind of already said that. Point is, it just feels really self-indulgent with these wordings. It doesn't feel like these wordings are natural. It breaks my immersion when I see these big words, because my first thought is, oh, but why would you use that word in this context when you had things that work way better for it that aren't as complicated? Anyways, I think another way that I can critique this book, again, without spoiling anything, is to talk about just how utterly boring and one-dimensional the villains are. I was mentioning this earlier, but the villains are hateable enough. I will give the authors that credit that by the end of the book, I did hate the villains for the reasons they wanted me to hate them. And that I would shed no tears if they both had been met with one of the most horrible fates frequently mentioned throughout this book. But it is noticeable that we get several chapters from both Tyler, the incompetent douchebag who always somehow fails upwards, while writing on the achievements of much more competent women around him, and Dan, the domestic abuser. We get multiple chapters from their points of views. And the chapters basically always amount to, I'm evil. Don't you hate me? Look at how sexist I am. Look at what a douchebag I am. I delight in other people's deaths and torments simply because I'm evil. Seriously, I give Tyler the benefit of his sections providing us with dramatic irony of what's going on, since his chapters for a brief moment are the only thing pushing the narrative forward. But being in their heads is very unpleasant because the narrative just wants to keep hammering home how awful these people are without giving us any dimension to them. Like, I get it. They're bad. They're evil. Men suck. Can we please move on or give them a couple pet the dog moments or something to make them feel like people and not caricatures? Caricatures. I'll figure out how to say that word one day. Honestly, this book does get to a certain point where I kind of want to call it a misandrist book. Like, I was reading this book and I was getting the distinct impression that this book was responding to misogyny that you often find in urban fantasy works by swinging it around the other way and marking it as misandrist instead. For the most part, there are very few men in this book that are helpful or good in any way, with the only one I can think of off the top of my head being a guy named Deadair. For the most part, they either talk down to the protagonists, serve as antagonists, or prove they just aren't ready for the life that the female heroines live every day and quickly back out of it. In addition, I think it's important to note how often characters get paragraph-long introductions here, describing them and their personality, but then just never reappearing in the story. Like, did I really need several paragraphs of the HR lady who's the literal embodiment of beige if she literally doesn't appear in any meaningful way throughout the rest of the book? Why did I spend so long learning about her appearance if this is the only scene she's in? In fact, the author kind of even interrupts other scenes for more physical descriptions. For example, this scene is supposed to be a tense scene between action sections where Julie's desperately scrambling for a solution while a foe unnervingly moves towards her. For the most part, The tone is consistent, serving to show us that Julie is on the back foot, desperately seeking a solution, while her opponent advances without fear. But then it kind of does this number. I didn't believe them when they said you'd come back. I mean, come on. Everyone knows that a killer... I didn't do it, Julie snaps fruitlessly. Should never return to the scene of the crime, even if they're desperate to see how badly they've hurt the people their victim left behind. It's a rookie mistake, I said. I was so sure that anyone devious enough to get past my words would be smarter than this. Her eyes held Julie's. They'd been celadine initially, more gray than green, merely an ancient pewter. But whatever it was that was making her cry glass invigorated the green, and now her gaze was the irradiated, tumbled malachite of cats. The glass filmed her throat, glazed the bony rise of her shoulders. It was dripping from her fingertips, a fortune of crystals. By the way, that also kind of serves to show how self-indulgent the writing is to a degree. But my point is, read that scene. That's a scene that's supposed to be tense. It's supposed to be an action scene. It's supposed to be that brief calm before the fight begins again. And we stop just to describe how green a character's eyes are. And it's not like this is a hint that helps Julie defeat this person. It's just describing how green her eyes are. Now, honestly, like I said, I don't need to spoil this book to talk about the several problems, because largely a lot of my problems come down to how it's written and how it's executed. So the only thing I am going to kind of spoil the book to talk about is I don't really understand how this world works. And yes, I get it. It's cosmic horror. Of course I don't understand how it works. The point of cosmic horror is a lack of understanding of what things are, what they want, which is why it's so effective. You're not supposed to explain eldritch horrors. They work best when they're shrouded in mystery, in the enigma, with no clear reason for their actions. After all, trying to explain the Reapers in Mass Effect directly resulted in a greatly reducing their mystique and presence by merely reducing them to an AI threat that was caught in a logic loop, versus the eldritch abomination they were presented as in the first two games.
There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
But hear me out. I still need to understand how the world the humans live in works. For example, for the longest time, I genuinely could not figure out how much the mundane people of this world know, or what they're supposed to know about the magical world. Julie introduces Sarah into it and vouches for her, which allows her into magical areas. And Sarah even kind of says that she always assumed Julie's stories were fantasy. But there's no sense of breached protocol or consequences when Julie does fully bring Sarah into this world. And there's entire education systems and programs in Harvard that are about teaching people to become monster hunters. And Wall Street itself is repeatedly implied to be like Wall Street, the concept, is described to be an eldritch being, and those who work on Wall Street not only know this, but their office actively participate in several magical points. I don't know much about business, but I'm pretty sure Tyler's, the thing he's head of, doesn't exist in the real world, and it's just a fancy term of saying, hey, this guy's in charge of dealing with the magical threats to the office. And everyone basically knows their upper management are eldritch of eldritch beings. Seriously, the fact that these offices function at all is a genuine miracle, because they make no sense to me. There's a guy who literally gets tortured because he very briefly turns his back on a corporate overlord while his ears are being blown out because his earmuffs aren't working, and the boss's interest requires a ton of flashing lights and a painful screeching noise. And I'm left to think, why? Why would anyone ever work at a company where there's a mistake as small as briefly turning your back to your boss when he enters the room with an eardrum bursting screech while blinding white light flashes is worthy enough for you to be turned into a Frankenstein monster from the torture you receive? Who would actually work at a law firm which literally mandated that you have to let brainworms into your head and puppeteer your body while you lose all sense of control in your life and you're forced to become a passenger in your own life? Who would work in a place where you're expected to literally sacrifice your life to an eldritch monster at the whim of upper management simply because it's the easiest solution for You know what? You know what? Yeah, no, never mind. This makes perfect sense. Anyways, point is, I don't think the world feels very well thought out. Much like much of the gore throughout the book, part of this world feels like it exists simply for the sake of being weird. Like it feels like when an AI chatbot it tries to get creative and starts going off script, throwing out random shit at you in an attempt to, match the zany tone it thinks you want, because it's drawing from several sources that aren't consistent with the theme of that bot. It's trying to be clever, but it's just making me question the world. Yes, I did look into chatbots a little bit. I got a little caught up in that stuff, but I'm over them now. But all in all, I'd give this book a 5 out of 10. Like I said, this isn't the worst book in the world. It's not interesting. It pads along too much. There's too many pages. Even by page 200, I was thinking, I can trim this book to half its size. I don't ever feel like things are moving along at a decent pace. It feels like Julie and Sarah are just kind of wasting time in their section. I don't like the fact that there's no guy in this book that isn't just a complete utter asshole, apart from the guy Dead Air. And even then, he feels more like, but this one's okay, guys. Or I should say, this one's okay, ladies. And I just don't think the proper solution to addressing misogyny in urban fantasy is to swing around and make it misandrist. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those, there's just a lot wrong with this book, and none of it's in a way that I'm just angry and like, about it. It's just in a way where it's like, because like I said, it's like more than halfway through the book when the actual plot starts. Other than that, the plot doesn't start in this book. It just meanders. Like, legitimately, at a certain point, at like page 140, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so Julie's already beaten the big threat I thought was supposed to be the big threat through this book. And that's what happened to Dan. I guess it would be interesting. I don't know what's going on. What is going on in this book? What is the book about? What is the story I'm supposed to be following here? All in all, it's just it's just not a it's not a book that I think would really catch your attention. I don't even think I'm going to check out the sequel, but maybe the sequel will be better, because the way the book ends, it seems like it's kind of hinting at a Monster of the Week kind of format for this series, with it ending with like a talking fox coming to the door. But I don't know. Based on what I've seen with this book, that doesn't sound like it'd be an interesting way for them to handle the book. One thing I really wanted to talk about is when I read the back of the book, one of the things that it describes Julie as is a coked up mess whose only retirement plan is dying early. So you would think a good portion of the book is her dealing with her various vices and trying to come to terms with them both sabotaging her and her becoming very reliant on the emotional support they offer her regardless of the self-destruction they cause her, right? No. The second Sarah comes into the picture, it's like Sarah's presence magically fixes her. Like, at a certain point, I was like sitting there thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, wasn't Julie a cokehead? The first part of the book, like the first 50 pages of the book really stresses how much of a disaster her life is. But then Sarah comes into it and it's almost like it's done, instantly fixed. It's not worth the read, despite it being 5 out of 10. In fact, this is probably one of the highest rated books. I probably will just say kind of deserves Mountain Dew. Largely because I don't know who I'd recommend it for. When it comes to, maybe if you're a big fan of cosmic horror, but in terms, I don't know. It's just, I don't know what to talk about with this book because it's so middle of the road. I can't summon the theatrics to pretend to be very angry at it, but I can't muster up enough goodwill at it to praise it. It's so middle of the road. That being said, with all things considered, just remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even if it's just like walking through the plains of Asphodel. See you later, everyone.